Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Lightsworn Yugioh deck profile for May 2021. I've been wanting to update the Lightsworn deck for quite a while now and finally got around to it. I'm very happy with the results of the deck. For those of you that know, I'm a big fan of just going pure Lightsworns with most of my builds, this one focusing on the Light Attribute deck and all of its different extra deck monsters, including Minerva, Michael, and Curious, with our main go-to boss monster, Judgment Dragon, in the main deck. I might focus on a Chaos version of the Lightsworn deck later on down the road, but until then, I guess I will focus with as pure as I can for the Lightsworn deck, with a little added support just to help with some of the graveyard playstyle that this deck is meant to do. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the Lightsworn monsters, we're going to go ahead and start off with their main deck boss monster, being Judgment Dragon. When I work on the Chaos version of the Lightsworn deck, I'll probably add in Levianeer as an added backup support for dragons, but Judgment Dragon, being your main go-to one, is a big help for sure. It cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned from your hand by having 4 or more Lightsworn monsters with different names in your graveyard, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. You can pay 1,000 life points to destroy all other cards on the field, and once per turn during the end phase, send the top 4 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So one of the most well-known boss monsters in the Yu-Gi-Oh series, I would say for sure, just for the fact that this card's been such a powerhouse over the years. Just being able to clear the field for 1,000 life points, setting up more cards in your graveyard by sending the top 4 cards of your deck, and if you have multiple Judgment Dragons in your hand, you can just special summon them out onto the field as long as you have the 4 different Lightsworn monsters in the graveyard. I run 3 just so you can have this card consistently in your hand. I feel it's good on those numbers. Like I said, when I run the Chaos version, I might adjust those numbers, but we're focusing on the pure Lightsworn deck for this video. With the other Lightsworn support, one of our main ones being Lumina, Lightsworn Summoner. Once per turn, you can discard 1 card to target 1 level 4 lower Lightsworn monster in your graveyard and special summon that target. And once per turn during the end phase, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So, for those of you that don't know, Lightsworns all have some kind of different mill effect with the main deck, just having to send more and more cards to the graveyard. So if you leave multiple Lightsworn monsters out on the field, there's a good chance you could deck out, and your opponent will let you do that because you can easily just go through the deck that much easier. But with Lumina, you have the option to basically go into a bunch of different special summons, including one of our main go-to ones with our level 4 tuner, and going into Michael, the Arch Lightsworn, a level 7 synchro monster. So having that special summon option with Lumina being able to even special summon herself by discarding another card and having another Lumina in the graveyard, and then using that Lumina on the field, since you're not restricted to the once per turn with this card. It's just a once per turn for that individual Lumina, but still having multiples on the field means you can use this card more than once. The best target that I use most of the time with Lumina is Raiden, Hand of the Lightsworn. During your main phase, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Then, if any Lightsworn monsters were sent there by this effect, this card gains 200 attack until the end of your opponent's turn. You can only use this effect of Raiden, Hand of the Lightsworn once per turn, and once per turn during the end phase, send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So if you summon Raiden, just himself, onto the field, you can send 2 cards with his main monster effect, and at the end of the turn, send 2 more, setting up plenty of cards in your graveyard for you to use. But like I said, most of the time this card is a target for Lumina, Lightsworn Summoner. But even if you just send a card off of Raiden, and it happens to be one of our next 2 Lightsworn monsters, you can get the materials needed on the field to overlay into Minerva, the Exalted Lightsworn, for many more plays from the extra deck. And once again, this is your tuner to go into, so with it you have plenty of other synchro options also. I also run 3 Wolf Lightsworn Beast. It cannot be normal summon or set. It must be special summoned by a card effect. If this card is sent from the deck to the graveyard, special summon it. So with this card, if you were to mill any of the cards from your main deck to the graveyard, you could special summon it onto the field. If you summon it off of Raiden, that can be the overlay for Minerva, or even a level 8 synchro summon, since once again Raiden is a tuner with no restrictions on what you can summon with it. So milling more and more Wolf to the graveyard just gives you special summon resources on the field to rely on also. With the other special summon option being Fellis, Lightsworn Archer, I've decided to bump this card up to 3. I remember in my last deck profile I had it at 2. With its restriction, it has to be sent with a monster effect. So if you summon it and send it off of cards like Solar Recharge or Charge of the Light Brigade, you won't be able to special summon it. But Raiden, or even just being able to summon it with Lumina from the graveyard, gives you another level 4 tuner monster option if need be with all your different cards on the field. And this card also has a destruction power when you contribute it to target 1 monster your opponent controls, destroy it, and then send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So not only can you destroy one of your opponent's resources, but also giving the option to send more cards to set up even potential more Fellas in the graveyard. For some of the one-ofs for the Lightsworn monsters, I run one Minerva, Lightsworn Maiden. Now with this card, it's more setup. If it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can mill the top card of your deck, setting up other cards, but being a level 3 tuner makes it all the better for just the different plays you can use in the extra deck, and also just for the recycle power with Judgment Dragon. I also run one Garith, Lightsworn Warrior. Each time a card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, if a Lightsworn monster you control except Garith, you send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard, then draw 1 card for each Lightsworn monster sent to the graveyard. It's draw power, and you can potentially set this card up very easily on the field with Lumina. Also, one Lila, Lightsworn Sorceress, for the spell and trap destruction. By changing her to defense from attack position, you can destroy a spell or trap on the field, and then send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard during each end phase. For some of the other Lightsworn monsters, I decided to run a few of the Twilightsworn Brigade just as an extra option, with Lila, Twilightsworn Enchantress as a more destruction option by banishing Lightsworn monsters, and one Raikou, Twilightsworn Fighter. This is the Raikou I prefer over the other one. The other one you have to flip up to use the destruction effect. This one just banishes a card on the field by banishing a Lightsworn from your hand or graveyard. Most of the time I like to go for the graveyard option, but still being able to just banish one of my opponent's cards. Very, very useful when it's normal summon or flip face up to banish one Lightsworn, to banish one card on the field. It doesn't target either, so you can get around a pretty good amount of other cards on the field that your opponent would be using for protection. For more graveyard setup cards, I run 2 Perform Mage Damage Juggler, and 1 Perform Mage Trick Clown, and 1 Perform Mage Hat Tricker. With the graveyard setup, if we mill any of the damage jugglers to the graveyard, we're giving our search option to then add to our hand the Hat Tricker with multiple cards in the field. It can be an easy special summon onto the field, and then if we send Trick Clown off of any of the Lightsworn mills with 8,000 life points paid, it's just another special summon on the field to rely on, which can then be resources, because we're not restricted to what we can summon out with Minerva, the Exalted Lightsworn, just needing 2 level 4 monsters. I also run 1 White Dragon Wifer Buster and 1 Black Dragon Collapse Serpent. With all the different light monsters, it's very easy to summon Collapse Serpent. We have a few dark attribute targets also. So even if we just open up Collapse Serpent early, we can use that for an extra deck resource, and then search out the Wifer Buster and banish the Collapse Serpent, just giving us more and more extenders in the deck for that summon. With the rest of the monsters for the main deck, just being 2 Mathematician, I've always liked this card in this deck with Mathematician, just being able to send a card to the graveyard. So if we're 1 card off of Judgment Dragon, we can send the specific Lightsworn we may need to the graveyard for that play. Even being able to send Fellas to the graveyard will enact her special summon, because you sent it with a monster effect, special summoning her onto the field. And then if this was the 1 card you needed, you can tribute it to then send 3 more cards and destroy one of your opponent's monsters before you bring out the big Judgment Dragon onto the field. But that is it for the monsters. For the main deck, we do run a pretty high monster count, but they all run very, very well together for that setup. Now, moving on to the spells, some of the most important spells in the deck. Running 3 Charge of the Light Brigade. You send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard to add 1 level 4 lower Lightsworn monster from your deck to your hand. So most of the time with this card, I search out Lumina, and just being able to potentially set up Lightsworns in the graveyard will give us our target for Lumina to special summon back onto the field. So 3 Charge just gives us that search power. It's not a once per turn either, so if you open up multiple Charge of the Light Brigade, you can set up plenty of cards in the graveyard and search out multiple Lightsworn monsters for you to use. For more of the draw power in the deck, I also run 3 Solar Recharge. You discard 1 Lightsworn monster to draw 2 cards, then send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So the draw power is first, and then just being able to have more graveyard setup. If you have, let's say, Lightsworns in your hand that are more of a dead draw, like Fellas or Wolf, you can use them for the discard, and then hopefully draw into some potentially better monsters that can already be set up, depending on what you send off of the Solar Recharge as well. For some of the one-ofs in the deck, I run 1 Lightsworn Sanctuary. Once per turn, you can send 1 Lightsworn monster from your hand to the graveyard, target 1 other Lightsworn monster in your graveyard, and add to your hand. Each time a card is sent from the deck to the graveyard, place 1 Shine counter on this card. If a Lightsworn card would be destroyed by a card effect, you can remove 2 Shine counters from this card for each Lightsworn card instead. So it's protection for your Lightsworn cards on the field, but also being able to recycle. Let's say you have a Lumina in the graveyard and you have a Raiden in your hand, being able to to swap the Raiden for a Lumina definitely makes for a better play, because then you have the better setup on the field for special summoning multiple cards on the field back to use. I also run 1 Reinforcements of the Army. Being able to search out Raiden or Gareth is just an added option for search power, thinning out the deck. Foolish Burial to set up more cards in the graveyard, or even just potentially Wolf for a special summon. 1 Monster Reborn, special summoning back Lumina onto the field, because Lumina doesn't have to be special summon, it just has to be on the field for day once per turn. 1 Reasoning for the different levels we run in the deck. Very easy to keep our opponent guessing. They can try and say level 8 for Judgment Dragon, but most of the time they'll miss that chance and will hit something better to use on the field. And lastly, the 1 Pot of Avarice to finish off the main deck. This one especially, because if we mill too many Judgment Dragons, we just want some resources back into the deck to use, or if we've gone through all of our Luminas and don't have any other way to recycle them back, this card just comes in handy for that recycle power, and has also saved me from decking out a lot during some of my practice games. And that is it for the main deck. When I move on to the X deck, I run 2 Minerva Exalted Lightsworn. Now, this can potentially be mixed and matched between Michael the Arch Lightsworn. If you want to run 1 Minerva and 2 Michael, that's player preference at that point. But Minerva, just having the option to detach 1 material from this card to send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard, then draw cards equal to the number of Lightsworn cards sent to the graveyard by this effect. If this card is destroyed by battle or sent in the owner's possession, destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Then you can destroy cards on the field up to the number of Lightsworn cards sent to the graveyard by this effect. You can only use this effect of Minerva Exalted Lightsworn once per turn. So with each one being a once per turn, it's just more setup with more cards you mill and protection of getting around this card, and just how easy it is to summon it onto the field, since we're running a good number of different level 4 monsters, whether they be the Perform Mages or even just the dragons. You have those overlay options to go into Minerva. With that being said, if you go those early game, you can then just mill potentially more Lightsworn cards to the graveyard, giving you more draw power and more destruction power. For the other Xyz monsters, I run 1 Tornado Dragon and 1 Baguska, the defensive plays, and if my opponent has cards on the field that can just potentially stop my light setup, Tornado Dragon comes in handy for that. But Baguska, just sitting on this because we don't run any traps in the deck, having more of a wall barrier against my opponent's cards can definitely help also. For the Synchro monsters, I run 1 Michael the Arc Lightsworn, needing a tuner and 1 or more non-tuner light monsters. So just having this option available for the play means that when we have that tuner and then the non-tuner light monster summoned out, we can pay 1,000 life points to banish a card down the field. And then when this card is destroyed, you can target any number of other Lightsworn monsters in your graveyard, shuffle them into the deck, and then gain 300 life points for each one returned. And then during the end phase, having to send the top 3 cards to the graveyard. So with this card, you have the option to take out potential cards of your opponents that would benefit from being destroyed by card effects, like let's say Judgment Dragon, but also this card can recycle a good amount of your Lightsworn cards back into the deck to reuse. Most of the time I like to hit the Luminas, because then I can easily draw these cards late game, having a thinner deck to go through. But also that banish is useful, and I thought of running 2 Michael. If you were to do so, you can take out 1 of the Minervas, because if you destroy Michael and there's another Michael in the graveyard, you can recycle the 1 back into the deck to reuse and then summon it again, causing that loop to go over and over again. And I also run 1 Bryonic, Defender of the Ice Barrier, and 1 Borreload Savage Dragon. Bryonic can be made with Lumina and Minerva, and this level 6 option comes in handy if I have more, Lightsworns in my hands, and I have the Judgment Dragon. So being able to discard them and bounce potential cards in my opponent's field that would, benefit more being returned than destroyed. And Borreload Savage Dragon with Raiden, Wolf, or Fellis, whatever combo you want to go for. And if I have a Link monster in the graveyard to equip, makes for a Powerhouse Synchro monster on the field for the level 8 option. And for the Link monsters, I run 1 Curious, the Lightsworn Dominion. You need 3 monsters with the same attribute, but different types. So the Lightsworns fit this very easily, with Phallus being a Beast Warrior, and then Raiden being Warrior, Illumina being Spellcaster. You name it, we have plenty of different options on the field, including some of the 1-ofs we run, just having those set up. And with the same attribute, we can even fit the Spellcaster role, or even just Judgment Dragon, for being a Dragon monster, or even Wyver Buster, meeting all these requirements to summon out Curious, the Lightsworn Dominion. And if this face-up card is destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect while in its owner's control, you can target 1 card in your graveyard, add it to your hand. So, recycle power for Judgment Dragon from the graveyard as well. And if this card is Link Summon, you can send 1 card from your deck to the graveyard, initiating other cards like Wolf or Fellis. But if this card is sent from your deck to the graveyard by a card effect, you send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So more setup with this card if you end up activating any of your other Lightsworn cards on the field. For the other Link monsters, I run 1 Hippo Shenengan for the light attribute boost, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 IP Masquerena, great with just setup on my opponent's turn to go into other ones like Nightmare Unicorn, Tsundere Yugioh, and also Boral Sword Dragon for more of the offensive plays using the extra deck. And then as for the go-to plays, a lot of it relies on luck, depending on what you will mill from your spell cards to search. But let's say you activate your charge of the Light Brigade and potentially send cards that can set up plays in the graveyard. So setting up, sometimes you'll get unlucky with some of the spell mills as well. But if you set up anything similar to this, depending on what you have in your hand, if you have your Lumina Lightsworn Summoner in your hand, you can discard other Lightsworns and still target them off of those cards. So if you send the Minerva from your hand to the graveyard, you can potentially summon out the Minerva back onto the field or the Raiden, depending on the play you want to go for. When you summon Raiden, you can then use Raiden again to mill 2 more cards from your deck to the graveyard. If you mill any cards like Fellis, that can be a special summon on the field. You then have the option to keep the Raiden on the field or even go for the Fellis and Lumina synchro play, or use the Fellis to destroy a card on your opponent's field by tributing it to then send 3 more cards to the graveyard from your deck. Setting up more and more can then just be more of a setup for special summoning Judgment Dragon if it's another card in your hand, destroying all the other cards in the field, or just going for the synchro option using our monsters to get out cards like Michael Lightsworn Archer or Bryonic if you want to go for the Minerva target. If you go for the Soul Raiden play and get lucky with the mill, just summoning out Raiden can be enough. If you were to mill 2 cards, and with one of those cards potentially being one that would special summon, whether it be Fellis or even Wolf from the deck, special summoning them back onto the field for that play, you can then overlay the 2 to go into Minerva, which will just give you more mill extensions from there using these cards. If you have more of a setup with the Raiden or another additional special summon on the field, if you summon Raiden and get lucky and hit both Wolf and Fellis for these special summons, you can also go for the target of a special summon from your hand with one of your Purple Mage monsters, and then have the option to go into a Link play, or before that, overlaying the 2. So you can link Raiden and your Fellis into the light attribute Hippo Shenengan, and not being restricted with what you need for Minerva, use the Hat Tricker with your Wolf to overlay into Minerva, having the boosted Minerva on the field, but also then the potential to go into a mill, which having just those 3 in your graveyard alone, if you mill 1 more Lightsworn, can summon out the Judgment Dragon onto the field, which will be boosted by the Hippo Shenengan as well as Minerva and itself. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Like I said, I always love updating the Lightsworn deck, and I definitely do plan to update this with a Chaos version later on down the road. I might have to increase some of the numbers in the deck, basically, because that's why I see with a lot of people focusing on just the heavy mills. But 40 cards I feel is fine with the pure version. You can just go through the deck that much more quickly, relying mostly on the light attribute Lightsworn monsters. But until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.